We need the Attorney General to step in and say, the buck stops here. The Attorney General is not going to allow local governments to break the law anymore in the state of Illinois.
I'm not informed on that. It should be clear that in Illinois' landscape of criminal enforcement, we are not the primary prosecutor's office.
Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul reacting to a question from the Center Square last week of concerns brought forward by Americans for Prosperity Illinois concerning the issue of taxpayer dollars and how they're used by local governments to possibly promote tax increase referendum. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Wake up with us at thecentersquare.com. Get the newsletter in your inbox, and all those headlines will be there, but you can check out other headlines at thecentersquare.com. Talked with Americans for Prosperity Illinois Director Brian Costin. He's the state director of AFP Illinois, and he talked about what they're finding and how they need some clarity from the Illinois Attorney General for issues that voters determine, but how are they being swayed by local officials using taxpayer dollars is a question that we've seen brought up in previous election times, but here we are approaching a 2026 election, and you could have across the state local referendum about tax increases, and Brian says that he's concerned as to how this ultimately will impact taxpayers if it's not clarified.
We need the Attorney General to step in and say, the buck stops here. Yeah, so we've seen this in a number of places across the state of Illinois where local taxing bodies are using public money to hire what I would call as professional tax hiking organizations to run public campaigns designed to gather support for tax hike referendums, specifically property tax hike referendums. And in some of these cases before, there's not a lot of avenue for citizens to do anything about it.
Counties, so I hope you ask the same.
How they can think that they've crossed the line in District 214, where they've done polling basically to get an understanding of what is the level of tax hike that the public might be comfortable with. They are trying to figure out how they can raise taxes on the people. And in the State Employees and Ethics Act, polling in connection with the referendum is verboten. It's not supposed to happen. And so we've sent a letter to the Attorney General asking them for clarification on the issue. Is this legal? Is this not legal? According to state statute, it looks like it's illegal. There's really no government body that is really paying attention to this too closely. In the past, we have sent some things to the Attorney General, and they basically said this is not our jurisdiction. Well, whose jurisdiction is it for the State Employees and Ethics Act? Local governments are supposed to be following these laws. So we want to get some clarification from the Attorney General. Can local government bodies work with private firms that say on their materials that their job and what they do and what they're successful at is passing tax hike referendums on the people of Illinois who are paying the highest property taxes in the nation? We think that taxpayers need a little bit of defending in the state of Illinois, and that's what we're trying to do.
So Costin laying that out for District 214, which I believe is a high school district in Arlington Heights, but he says that it's happened elsewhere. And you think about this in the context too of in 2020, there was a referendum on the ballot statewide asking voters in Illinois to change the state constitution's flat income tax to a tax with higher rates for higher earners, and voters rejected that. There was advocacy from state legislators when they were discussing the measure on the General Assembly floor, but that wasn't using tax dollars to go out and try to gauge public interest about it, other than through that referendum process, right? Yes, tax dollars were used, but the question was vetted to be clear, concise, and neutral. It wasn't a poll of sorts to say, hey, do you want to tax the rich to feed the poor, or do you want to let the wealthy keep their money, right? And you can craft poll questions all kinds of different ways. So, you have the referendum process and elected officials debating it and, advocating or opposing it, right? But that's in their official capacity as a legislative body. If the governor's office was to use official governor office, resources to put out messaging in favor of the issue, that would raise some ethical questions. Well, what about on the local government if they do that? So that's what Costin's warning about, and he says this has happened in the past, and they really need that clarity.
Yeah, so it's very, very common that when a property tax increase, sales tax increase referendum goes on the ballot, that local government bodies hire people for public information campaigns. They're not supposed to cross a line and actually encourage people to vote one way or the other. But we can't, say, for example, in District 214, which is proposing up to a 900, they're talking about proposing a $900 million referendum. The materials that they were receiving from the companies to do these public information campaigns were loaded with references of passing referendums in difficult tax environments. And so it's quite clear that the types of firms that they're trying to hire are people who are engaging in politics. A couple of stories: Rochester, Illinois. They hired a couple of firms to do the Creative Entourage was the name of the organization, and they hired them to do polling, basically asking, do you think that the library is valuable? Do we need money? Do you support that? And then they turned that information over to first the Rochester Library, and then the Rochester Library sent that over to the campaign committee, including all the information of the people who took that poll. That crossed the line. We filed an ethics complaint. The Ethics Commission basically said, yes, these things that we were saying are essentially true, but we can't do anything about it because their ordinance was defective. So what happens when local governments are breaking the law to try to pass tax increases? We need the Attorney General to step in and say, the buck stops here. The Attorney General is not going to allow local governments to break the law anymore in the state of Illinois. They do have a model ordinance on their website, which they recommend to local governments to use to comply with state law. But then there's no enforcement of it when local governments cross that line. And so we need the Attorney General or the General Assembly to say, hey, we need someone to step in and make sure that taxpayers are being protected and local governments aren't engaging in prohibited political activity that tip the scales in favor of tax hikes on the people of Illinois, who are the most taxed people in the entire country.
Now, the Center Square's Jim Talamonte was in front of Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul last week, and he asked about, is this worth investigating in this particular school district that AFP Illinois raised, but also just the general issue. Here's what the Attorney General responded with.
I'm not informed on that. It should be clear that in Illinois' landscape of criminal enforcement, we are not the primary prosecutor's office. There are some attorneys general offices in other attorney general's offices in other states where they are both the statewide prosecutor and the local prosecutor. The majority of criminal cases in the state of Illinois and the structure of our criminal justice system are prosecuted by local prosecutors. So I don't even know where District 214 is, whether it's in Cook County or another county. So I hope you ask the same question to the local prosecutor wherever District 214 is.
So you've got Costin saying that they've put formal requests in. They've tried to do this. Local bodies saying they don't really know how to rectify this or hold people accountable. And Costin's group, AFP Illinois, is asking for the Attorney General to clarify this. So we'll see if there's any further on this. But Costin warning taxpayers ahead of the 2026 elections as to watching their local governments and how they're spending dollars on potential referendum questions.
Yeah, there's going to be elections and referendums that are coming up this November and next year in April. I think what you should be aware of as a taxpayer is if you see your local government body hiring a company to doing a political public information campaign, that should set your alarm off, and then you should start digging into it to see if they are crossing the line and violating state law. The reason that they do these public information campaigns is primarily to raise your taxes. And so if they're doing polling to see what type of tax hike that the public might be comfortable with, that's a big red flag. If they're talking only on one side of the issue on why this is absolutely necessary and not talking about the costs to the taxpayers, that's another giant red flag. If you're having issues with that, reach out to an organization like Americans for Prosperity. We're interested in balancing the scales a little bit for the taxpayers. We want to make sure that local governments aren't breaking the law. And if you suspect that, please reach out to us and we'll see what we can do.
Clearly, we'll hear a lot more about this as we get closer to the elections. We got a March primary statewide, and there might be some local questions that you have to consider. Then you got the election in November. We could see a referendum statewide on the ballot in November concerning tax increases for millionaires. These are just some of the stories that you'll see at the Center Square, Illinois. Encourage you to go check that out, where another great report from Jim Talamonte about last night's debate between 3 of the 10 Democrats running for U.S. Senate. You can also read about a proposal to tax millionaires with half the money going to school districts and half the money going to property tax relief, and so many other stories at thecentersquare.com. So go get the headlines in your inbox. Again, at thecentersquare.com. Click newsletter and sign up today. We'll be with it each and every weekday morning here for the Center Square with Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Have yourselves a great rest of the day.